The COVID vaccines in use now have been through very large clinical trials that have proven they're both safe and effective. If we use AstraZeneca as an example, those clinical trials have exceeded 60,000 participants, and again they've proven the vaccine is not only safe but also very effective. But in addition to the clinical trials, we have a really large real-world experience now which also has shown these vaccines are very safe and really effective. All vaccines do potentially come with some side effects, often because the vaccine stimulates the immune system a little like an infection, but to a much lesser degree. That's essentially how they work. In the case of the COVID vaccines, what people can reasonably expect is most people will have a little bit of a sore arm for less than 24 hours. A sore arm that doesn't interfere with your day-to-day activities. And a small proportion of people might have some systemic effects. And what that might look like is feeling a bit tired, maybe having a fever, or having some aches and pains on the day of your vaccine. This is a really small price to pay for being protected against such a nasty virus. We know anaphylaxis can happen with any medication or vaccine, and we have seen some cases of anaphylaxis with the COVID vaccines. The mRNA type vaccines like Pfizer are notorious for causing that, due partly to how they're made. But even with that, the rate is really low. Most recent figures would suggest less than 5 cases per million doses. And we have seen some very rare cases of anaphylaxis with AstraZeneca as well, but no higher than we'd perhaps expect from any vaccine. And the most important thing is it's been managed really well. There have been no deaths from that. And in terms of our rollout in Australia, everywhere giving these vaccines has received specific training on how to manage that. So we'd completely expect it to be managed perfectly well and for those people to recover if that rare event was to happen. If people do have a history of anaphylaxis, we take a little bit more care with their vaccine, particularly keeping them a little longer where they've had the vaccine for a slightly extended period of observation. It's also important for people to tell people at their vaccination centre what allergies they might have, because if they've had a specific allergy to something contained in the vaccine, then they would have to discuss that with the doctor there at the time. The issue with blood clots is an interesting example of what we're going to see moving forward, I think. We know that these type of clots unfortunately happen in a population, and they're going to keep happening with the rollout of the vaccine. So if you give a lot of people in that population a vaccine, unfortunately by sheer coincidence, some of those events will be recorded in people that have been recently vaccinated. That doesn't mean the vaccine caused it, just means they're going to have that anyway, and because we're observing them post-vaccine, we report those events so that everyone else can know that's happened and make sure it doesn't represent a safety concern. The issue with clots in Europe has been really extensively investigated and been concluded to not be linked with the vaccine. So people should not be apprehensive about this vaccine because of those reports and understand it's simply the observation of events that would have happened anyway. I think some of those countries that did pause the rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine are notoriously overcautious. And I think it took 1 or 2 countries to pause for the other countries to I think the countries that initially paused the rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine because of that issue are notoriously cautious. And I think other countries nearby didn't want to be seen to be not protecting their residents, so they also paused the rollout of that vaccine when we had enough data to know those events weren't likely to be linked and that the vaccine was safe and effective. And the interesting point to consider is it's quite clear that the harm from pausing the vaccine in terms of allowing COVID to proceed far exceeds any of the risks perceived to be linked to those clots. So actually it's more harmful to not roll out the vaccine than to continue, particularly now that we know those events weren't linked to the vaccine. The AstraZeneca vaccine has been proven safe as well as effective in really large clinical trials, exceeding now over 60,000 participants. And we have a real-world experience, including more than 10 million people, that has also shown that vaccine has been safe and effective. We can also take a lot of reassurance from our regulator, the Therapeutic Goods Administration. They certainly wouldn't approve a vaccine if there wasn't more than enough data to support its use. And they also wouldn't allow a vaccine to continue to be used if there were any legitimate safety concerns. And in this case there hasn't been, which is why we did keep using it, and that's clearly the right decision. Look, I was really excited for my number to finally come up and get my COVID vaccine today. So I received my first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine. It really wasn't uncomfortable at all, and I've had no adverse effects to report whatsoever. So my experience has been one that I think the majority of people could expect, and it was perfect, and I'm really glad that I'm now starting to be protected from COVID-19.